The very first video I ever posted on here in March of 2009 was a video you can still see called Christians, Secularism is Good for You. It's incredibly awkward and rambly, but hey, I gotta start somewhere. The premise of the video is telling Christians that secular values are there to protect them in case they were to somehow find themselves in the minority. I use Islam as a hypothetical example, before Islamophobia really took off as a political position in the US, and pretty much all data shows that Islam in the US will be around 2% by 2050. But the right is now convinced that Muslims are somehow going to force Sharia law on us with 2% of the vote, even in my hypothetical scenario, if Islam became the majority in the US. If we ensured that secularism was in place, Christians could still practice as they pleased, and Muslims wouldn't get special treatment. In nations where a religion is a minority, including Christianity, they love secularism, while the majority religion denounces it as terrible and satanic. This is true in many Islamic nations as well. Well, this is another video that Christians especially view as oppression, but is actually there to ensure a religion's good name isn't damaged by abuse. Regulation and tax laws. Sorry, I know you just fainted out there. If government can regulate and tax you, then we're all going to have to tattoo 666 on our foreheads because there's no more freedom of religion. Or perhaps, just maybe, it will do the opposite, and make your religion purer and better. At the moment, Christianity is massively pandered to by people on both the left and the right. However, if you're demanding that your politicians believe as you do, then you are demanding to be lied to. In many Northern European nations, talking about one's religion when running for office is considered a tacky, cynical way to score political points. You couldn't win on your own ideas alone, and it cheapens your faith as you love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets that you may be seen of men. The very thing Jesus said not to do, all in exchange for votes. Because of this, legislation that appears to some to oppress religion, but actually helps it, is fought tooth and nail, and religion ends up getting a worse and worse name, exploited by greedy, cynical, amoral people, turning away the very people you are trying to reach. We'll start with regulation and then move on to taxes. In Indiana, churches are given such special treatment that they can essentially own businesses with none of the safety protections these businesses would normally have. In a regular daycare, you have to be certified or at least have some sort of standard of safety that can be inspected. If a church is running a daycare, though, the idea goes out the window. They have no oversight in Indiana, and every year a completely preventable amount of young children find their way into baptismal pools and drown. With just some basic regulation, the churches would never have had that happen. But being inspected is viewed as so awful to them that these young children die yearly for no good reason. The Catholic Church spent years molesting women and children and covering it up, and in any other organization, there would at least be some way to get the government involved. But the laws are set up to keep the government out of religious communities' affairs unless it impacts people outside the community or someone ends up dead. We barely prosecute sexual assault outside of religious settings as it is, but with a veil of religious immunity, the Catholic Church was hurt terribly by this scandal when it came out, as they were protecting the priests and moving them around to molest again, and people left the church in droves. And Protestants, especially evangelicals, don't think you're off the hook. The Catholic Church gets the lion's share of the hate because it's a top-down organization and complicit from the top in the molestation as they actively cover it up. But Protestant churches overall have more sexual abuse than even the Catholic Church because there is literally no oversight at all. If the scandal ever comes out, you can just move to a different church and the problem isn't solved and prevented from happening again. You're just in a different church. Some churches have smartly set up rules that adults can never be left alone with children, and there should be 2 adults with children at any time, to reduce the chances of abuse drastically. Even if a majority in the church would never do that, it keeps the honest person honest, and ensures there's a witness in case something like that ever comes forth. There was a case where a Lutheran church decided not to give a woman who had worked for them for decades a retirement pension that had been agreed to, and they had complete legal standing to do it, because they had religious immunity, and were exempt from labor laws. Luckily, the court overturned this, and was given her due diligence, but it's still an option and she had to fight really hard for it. Nothing says pure religion and undefiled before God like visiting the widows in their affliction that you caused. And lastly, we come to taxes. The one regulation that Christian churches chafe under all the time is the Johnson Amendment, that if you don't want to be taxed, you can't tell people who to vote for. or you will be taxed. This is both for churches and for 501c3s. You barely even have to file taxes or open your books to show the government how much money you made and where it went, so long as you don't tell people who to vote for. You can tell people what positions to take politically, you just can't tell them specific candidates. If you want to start a religious nonprofit or a 501c3, you can gain a tax-exempt status, but you have to jump through quite a few hoops to prove you aren't just scamming the government. You have to show you're providing a benefit to society, be that education, community building, or charity. For churches, there's no such criteria. You just have to declare yourself a church and you automatically get tax-exempt status. And while many churches are doing charity-based work, building community, and educating people, it's one of the easiest methods to run a scam operation through and make millions to even billions. Televangelists, megachurches, prosperity gospel preachers, Oral Roberts telling his TV congregation to send him money or God would kill him, manipulating people by telling them that God will reward them financially if they send him money, most of those people being poor people. The religious tax law is clearly one of the easiest ways to pervert people's genuine faith into a money-making scam, convincing desperate people who can't afford it to hand over their hard-earned money tax-free. And just like how ISIS and Al-Qaeda violence gives Islam a bad name, these tax-exempt swindlers give all of Christianity a bad name. People begin to view all religion as just a way to get money from people, just like without safety regulations or controls to protect against pederasty or sexual assault, or when used cynically as a vote-getter, people begin to just view religion as just a greedy power structure to control people, and not a particularly good thing to believe in. A religious person begins to be viewed as gullible, falling prey to Nigerian prince internet scams, as opposed to someone with a noble calling. Until churches stop viewing government taxing and regulation on their organizations who are legitimately acting as a charity, such as if they were to be forced to file for a 501c3 as a form of religious persecution instead of a way to protect the religion from a bad name, a large chunk of religion will continue to be a multi-billion-dollar scam, with all the most greedy and unscrupulous people making tax-free billions scamming people for everything they have through megachurches and televangelism. It's really up to you. America is seeing a rapid decline religiously thanks to people equating religion with gullibility and hypocrisy. Thanks to all these scandals that could easily be prevented with a little government oversight and a few extra hoops. And people would be a lot harder pressed to compare all religion with the greedy, corrupt, hypocritical, and molesting scumbags. A good name is better to be chosen than great riches, as some guy said somewhere.